Scotland has once again been named the drug capital of Europe. 1,051 people had drug-related deaths in Scotland last year, the equivalent of almost 3 people per day. Now, it's the lowest figure since 2017, but it's still higher than the numbers recorded in the rest of the UK and Europe. Now, the SNP have backed calls to decriminalise drugs, saying that radical change is needed to save lives. Now, decriminalisation would stop users from being prosecuted for personal possession, and only dealers would be prosecuted. But critics say that it's not that simple, and that it could lead to more addicts and antisocial behaviour. You heard a robust disagreement between Mike and Benjamin earlier. Nina, what do you make of this idea of decriminalising, not legalising, but decriminalising drugs?
I would give it a very, very cautious yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I watched a terrible little segment on the BBC last night where they were, heralding the report coming out today, and they were filming in Dundee and Glasgow, and it was just so tragic watching people's lives completely wasted, and showing that actually if there was more assistance, mm-hmm. that the problem could be ameliorated in some way. Now, I know about Dundee because I worked there for 12 years. It's a city of 3 Js, jam, jute and journalism. Right. And I worked for DC Thomson's, who are the big company that do the Dandy and the Beano, mm-hmm. about 30 different publications. It used to be a thriving city for jute, which the jute would come in from India, and the jute mills, and those jute barons were very, very wealthy people back then. And so people had work. When that all went, Dundee became a very different place. And I worked there in the late 60s and early 70s. And I don't know what was happening then, but in those days, I don't think it was drugs, because I have no real personal knowledge of drugs. But women who came out of the factories or finished their work on a Friday afternoon and got their money were drunk in the streets. Oh. I've never seen anything else. So there's a history of getting out of it, escaping poverty, deprivation, or just awful grinding hard times.
So a cautious yes for you. Kulveer, what do you make of it? Decriminalising drugs. I know that it's a very sensitive issue for politicians. SNP have backed it, but Labour, Conservatives are nowhere near it. It's a very sensitive issue. But I'll just put to you that Portugal has had a huge amount of success with decriminalising drugs. Their deaths have been plummeting ever since they decriminalised drugs. They just had 74 deaths in 2021. Bear in mind, Portugal's twice the size in population terms than Scotland. Scotland's now just over 1,000 deaths, Portugal 74. Isn't it time we gave decriminalisation a go in Scotland?
No, it's an interesting case, and obviously anything that can look to improve the situation, we should look at. But I'm on the view that this is a slippery slope where we look to decriminalise. I hear everything that Nina's saying, and I agree with her. There is actually, what Nina's saying is the broader economic challenge. It's not just the decriminalisation. If we're going to tackle the issue in Scotland, I don't have any first-hand knowledge, but obviously I've witnessed what's happened in Scotland over the last 20, 30 years. And we've got a generation that's been lost to drugs in Scotland. And it's all good for the SNP to now say, well, decriminalisation, that's the answer here. It's much more fundamental to that. As Nina was saying, it's economics, it's society, it's what do young people have? Where are they going to go with their lives? What jobs are they going to do? What apprenticeships? All these things that formulate and give people a future, that take them away from things like drugs, as well as clamping down on the criminal activity. I want to see more of that, as probably do most politicians, before we start talking about decriminalising being the Band-Aid to the big problem.
OK, Nina, very briefly.
Can I just say quickly that the people in Dundee who can make things happen and make things have worked so hard to turn Dundee into a place where tourists come. There's a new branch of the V&A. They're trying to. The whole waterfront has been redeveloped so that to bring tourists, to bring more of an influence of the outside world, to bring money in, to bring tourism in. They've worked so hard for it. OK. Well,
we've seen a slight decrease from last year, about 200, just over 200. Let's find out what people are saying at home. Bernie in London. Good afternoon, Bernie. What do you think about decriminalisation? We know that in a country like Portugal, it's worked very well for them.
Hi, Alexis.
Hi, Bernie. Go ahead.
Okay. The reason I called is that I caught your segment just before you switched panels.
Yeah.
And at that time, the reaction from Mike Parry, I thought, was appalling insofar as he felt that it was giving out drugs to people. That's what decriminalisation means. It doesn't mean that at all, of course. I should say I work for a substance misuse organisation. The fact is that there is, and I think you've already made the point, that decriminalisation and legalisation are two entirely different things.
Correct.
And decriminalisation means that we can give the help to the people that have been affected by drugs. We can give empathy to people that need it. We can give support. And most crucially, we can reduce deaths. And that's what this is all about, because in the field that I work in, to me, the most important performance indicator is reducing deaths. And you have already mentioned a couple of times the Portugal project, and that has shown entirely that deaths come down when drugs are decriminalised, because we need to help people rather than demonise them.
Okay.
Addiction is an awful, I won't say disease, but an awful problem, and it needs to be treated rather than demonised.
Bernie, thank you. I'm only going to leave it there because I know a lot of people want to have their say. One of the architects of the decriminalisation of the Portugal scheme said this, which I think is quite important. He said, "We are dealing with a health condition, with a disease. We do not criminalise other diseases." And when you look at, they haven't just said, OK, well, if you've got drugs, we won't prosecute you. There is a whole, you go, if you get caught with drugs, you get seen by a health professional there, and they decide what happens to you next, what help they're going to give you next. The idea that decriminalising means we're just going to let people off, that's not quite what's happened in Portugal. So there's more going to go in there.
Support system.
Yeah,
but it's also a criminal business. It's not just a disease. This is being.
But you go after the dealers for the criminal business, not the users.
But there's a market that those dealers are there for.
Sure.
Right, and that market, if that market is not being targeted, if it says, OK, that market can exist, yes, we say the dealers are going to be targeted, but they're still being targeted now. I'm not sure that argument also stands.
Out.
Well, I'll come back to the criminal aspect of it. I want to hear from Ashley in London. Ashley, good afternoon.
Hello.
What's your view, Ashley? Should we be decriminalising drugs?
No, not at all. I reckon it's a totally wrong move to make. I'm an ex-user myself, and I know that if you decriminalise drugs themselves, the dealers will go cheaper, and the addicts that are already addicts would start using more, and just making it decriminalised, and it would make people use drugs more. And like alcohol itself is a very well-known drug that kills people, puts people in hospital a lot. So if you start decriminalising other drugs will be used more, and it put more pressure on the NHS and everything like that. I think it's the wrong move to make, totally.
But Ashley, do you believe that by keeping the criminal charges, you're preventing more people from doing drugs? And as you mentioned yourself, well, that didn't stop you, did it?
No, it has stopped me. I'm clean now. I'm totally clean. I was lucky enough to get the help.
Right. So the help. So Ashley, do you not think that by decriminalising it, Benjamin mentioned it earlier, that people can get help easier because it's not a criminal issue? We know that quite a lot of drug users lose their lives, unfortunately, because they're doing drugs alone, in private. And if there is a problem, people are reluctant to call the police because it's a criminal issue. If you take the criminality of using, not distributing, using away from drug use, then don't you think, Ashley, that you're going to be able to give medical help, the help that you got, easier for people if we take the criminal element away?
But the medical help is out there to help people who are users and addictions already. The help's already out there. If you decriminalise it, it's telling people that they're not as bad as as they are, and it make people curious and want to use more because it is decriminalised and the laws on it have gone down. Do you know what I mean? So
Okay. No, I do know what you mean. You make a fine point, and I think a lot of people will be agreeing with your point. Ashley, thank you. Thank you all for your calls to this.